He built his empire on blood. But when she broke, the Mafia boss realized how fragile love truly is. Arden Presley stood in the small apartment above the bakery, his shoulders tight, tattoos visible under his dark shirt. The room felt too still. Bonnie Lou Q faced him from only a few feet away, flowers still under her fingernails, her dark hair slipping from its braid. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but her voice stayed firm. "Arden, please leave." He moved as if to reach her, but she lifted her hand, stopping him cold. For a man who controlled entire streets with a single command, he looked completely lost. His strength meant nothing here, nothing against the pain in her eyes. "I can't stay in this life," Bonnie said, breath trembling. "I can't feel watched, guarded, controlled. I'm tired of living like I'm locked away." The distance between them felt heavier than the walls closing in. Arden's jaw tightened, helplessness settling over him in a way he wasn't built for. Bonnie wiped her cheek, her voice small but steady. "If you really love me, please just let me go. If you want to know why a woman would walk away from the man everyone fears, and how far Arden will go to win her back. Thank you, truly, thank you for spending these moments with me. Every time you watch, every time you listen, every time you allow these characters to touch your heart, you give life to this channel. Your support is the reason these stories continue to breathe. We're on a journey together, one built on love, heartbreak, healing, and resilience. And now, we're reaching for a new milestone, 10,000 subscribers. It's a big dream, but it's a dream we can reach together. If you've been enjoying these stories, if you've ever felt seen, moved, comforted, or inspired by them, please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. Your subscription isn't just a number. It's a message that these stories matter, that this little storytelling family is growing, and that we're building something beautiful here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying. And thank you for being part of this journey. Let's reach 10,000, side by side. Arden Presley had spent 20 years building an empire most men would never dare speak about in public. His hands carried the weight of deals made in dim rooms, alliances forged on docks at midnight, and decisions that shaped the flow of money from the port of New Orleans all the way down to the Gulf Coast. People stepped aside when he walked into a room, not because he asked them to, but because his presence left no space for hesitation. He was the kind of man whose name traveled faster than he did. He lived in a restored antebellum mansion on St. Charles Avenue. Tall columns, black ironwork, and windows that stretched upward like watchful eyes. The house was beautiful, but it felt more like a fortress. Guards stood behind discreet hedges, cameras blended into the oak trees, and security cars circled the block every hour. Arden slept lightly, woke early, and moved through hallways polished to perfection yet empty of real warmth. His mornings began with briefings in his study, a room filled with expensive furniture that couldn't soften the tension always humming beneath every conversation. Men in tailored suits spoke in polite tones about shipments, accounts, and territory. But each word carried an edge. Everyone sitting at that long table understood that one wrong move could cost more than money. Arden listened with a calm expression, but his mind never stopped measuring risks, threats, and loyalty. Control had become second nature to him. So had isolation. His body told its own story. Tattoos covered his arms, curling up his neck like inked reminders of the life he fought to survive. Each mark came from a moment that tested him, a fight, a loss, a promise. His muscular build made his suits strain at the shoulders, no matter how perfectly they were tailored. People often mistook his silence for coldness, but in truth, his silence was a shield. It was easier to rule when no one got close. Easier to be feared than understood. Yet despite everything he owned, power, money, influence, his life felt stripped of softness. No one touched him without purpose. No one asked about his day unless they needed something. No one looked at him like he was simply a man. Across the city, Bonnie Luque lived in a world that felt like another universe entirely. Her mornings started before dawn in the Marigny neighborhood, long before the streets filled with music and chatter. She stepped into her grandmother's bakery while the sky was still dark, tying her worn apron around her waist and brushing stray flour from her hair. The first thing she did each morning was inhale the familiar scent of yeast and sugar. It grounded her, connected her to memory, and reminded her why she kept the shop running even after her grandmother passed. Bonnie kneaded dough with practiced hands, letting the slow, steady rhythm soothe her. She found comfort in the simple repetition, mixing ingredients, shaping pastries, placing trays into the oven. While some people needed noise or company, Bonnie found her peace in these quiet hours. To her, the warmth of the ovens, the soft glow from the small kitchen lamps, and the sound of bread rising were enough. By the time the neighborhood began to stir, the bakery filled with regular customers. Some came for their morning coffee, others for the sweet rolls Bonnie perfected over years of trial and error. The shop felt alive with greetings, laughter, and familiar faces. Children ran in with sticky fingers. Elderly neighbors told her the same stories every week. Musicians grabbed bayonets before late gigs. She knew every face, every order, every name. Bonnie didn't live a life filled with luxury, but she lived one filled with connection. Her joy came from little things: freshly baked bread, flowers blooming outside her window, helping someone pick out pastries for a birthday, seeing a stranger's smile brighten after a long day. She believed in goodness because she saw it every morning, in every person who walked through her door. Her appearance reflected her life, simple, warm, and genuine. Her dark hair was usually tied back in a braid that loosened as the day went on. Her cheeks often carried faint traces of flour. Her eyes lit up when anyone talked about food or family. She had a softness that made people feel welcome, a kindness that made them stay longer than they intended. Bonnie's world was safe, predictable, built on love, tradition, and community. Arden's world was sharp, controlled, built on danger, dominance, and silence. They should never have met. Their paths were never meant to cross. A man who ruled through fear had no reason to walk into a life filled with warmth and innocence. And Bonnie had no reason to step into the orbit of someone like him. But fate has a quiet way of pushing two people toward each other, even when their lives exist on opposite sides of the same city. The night of the charity gala at Commander's Palace felt worlds away from Bonnie Luque's usual routine. The Garden District shimmered under soft lights, and the iconic turquoise building was alive with luxury cars, rich laughter, and guests dressed in designer gowns and sharp tuxedos. Inside, the air carried the scent of fine wine, polished silver, and money. Conversations drifted through the room, light, empty, and full of the confidence only wealth could give. Arden Presley didn't care for this kind of event, but appearances mattered. He stood near a balcony door, wearing a sleek black suit that fit his broad frame perfectly. His tattoos barely peeked from under his cuffs, but he still drew attention, murmured hellos, stiff nods, careful glances. Everyone knew he was powerful. No one fully understood how powerful. Tonight, he was here under the label of legitimate businessman, someone who sponsored community programs and restoration projects. A man with influence, nothing more. But Arden was already bored. His mind drifted as donors approached him with polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. He scanned the room out of habit, noting the exits, the security placements, the faces that lingered too long. He felt detached, like he was watching everything from behind glass. That was when she walked in. Bonnie had agreed to help her friend at the last minute, stepping in for a catering staff member who'd fallen sick. She wore a simple black uniform, her hair tied back, her hands still smelling faintly of vanilla from her morning baking. She tried to stay focused, reminding herself this wasn't her world. The room felt too bright, too polished, too loud for someone who found comfort in warm ovens and quiet mornings. She kept her head down as she carried a tray of champagne flutes through the crowd, trying not to bump anyone wearing jewelry that cost more than her yearly rent. She felt the weight of every gaze, even though most people didn't pay her more than a passing glance. Until she reached Arden. He wasn't watching the stage, or the mayor, or the overflowing room. He was scanning the edges, always on alert, when Bonnie stepped into his path. One hurried guest brushing past her from behind caused her tray to tilt. The glasses clinked, one slipping forward. Before she could steady it, a splash of champagne touched the sleeve of Arden's suit. Bonnie froze. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean. I can clean it, Her words tangled over each other, her throat tightening with embarrassment. Arden didn't even look at his sleeve. His attention snapped to her face and stayed there. Everything else fell away. The music, the voices, the glittering room. All of it blurred into nothing because this woman, this staff member who looked terrified she'd ruined his night, felt more real than anything around him. Her eyes were wide, sincere, framed by lashes that trembled with nerves. Her cheeks flushed as she tried to steady the tray with shaking hands. "It's fine," Arden said quietly, his voice rougher than he intended. Bonnie blinked, unsure whether he was angry or simply stating a fact. I'm usually more careful," she whispered. He could hear the honesty in her voice. No excuses. No pretense. Just truth. Arden gently took the tray from her hands, placing it on a nearby table. "You don't need to worry," he said. "Really?" Her breathing eased a little, though her nerves still flickered at the edges of her expression. When she finally looked up into his eyes, something shifted inside her. She wasn't sure what it was, but it made her chest tighten. He held her gaze longer than he should have. Long enough for her to feel the weight of it. "What's your name?" he asked. "Bonnie. Bonnie Luque," she said softly. A small smile touched his lips, a rare, unguarded one. "Arden." She nodded, her hands still fidgeting slightly. "It's nice to meet you. Even if I nearly soaked you." The corner of his mouth lifted again. "I've had worse nights." They stood there for only a few minutes, but it felt longer. Bonnie told him she helped run her grandmother's bakery. How she woke early, how she loved watching dough rise, how she believed food carried emotion. She spoke with a kind of warmth he hadn't heard in years, about community, kindness, and small joys that grounded her life. Arden listened. Fully. Not because he needed information, not because there was advantage in it, but because her voice soothed something in him he didn't know needed soothing. No one here talked like she did. No one here felt like she did. But Arden couldn't stay in that moment forever. Someone called his name from across the room, pulling him back into the world he belonged to. He looked at Bonnie one last time. He didn't ask for her number. But as he walked away, he already knew he would find her. 3 days passed before Bonnie saw him again. It was early morning in the Marigny, the kind of soft, golden light that made the neighborhood look almost tender. The bakery had just opened, and the smell of fresh bayonets drifted through the air. Bonnie was wiping down the counter, humming absent-mindedly, when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up. Her breath caught. Arden Presley stepped inside, looking nothing like the man lost in a sea of wealth at the gala. Here, in her small bakery, he seemed more solid, more present. His dark shirt clung to his frame, his tattoos visible along his forearms. But there was something else, something gentler in the way he took in the room, as if he weren't sure he belonged. "Morning," he said, his voice quieter than she expected. Bonnie tried to steady her pulse. "You came here." "I said I'd find you," he replied simply. She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to smile. Part of her wanted to hide behind the espresso machine. But she stepped forward, hands tucked behind her apron. "What can I get you?" He glanced at the menu, though he clearly wasn't reading it. "Whatever you like best." She raised an eyebrow. "You're trusting me with that?" "I think I can manage." Bonnie handed him a warm plate of bayonets and poured a cup of coffee. Arden took a seat by the window, the morning sun brushing over him like it had been waiting for him. Bonnie tried to return to her work, but her eyes kept drifting toward him. She wasn't used to someone like him being in a space that felt so much like home. After a few minutes, he spoke. "Sit with me." Her heart fluttered, but she joined him. What started as 5 minutes became an hour. He asked about the bakery, her grandmother, her routine. She talked about waking up before dawn, about finding peace in dough rising, about loving the small joys most people overlooked. She laughed softly as she described her grandmother's superstitions, how she used to tell Bonnie that bread rose better when you whispered kind words to it. Arden didn't tease, didn't look confused. He listened. Truly listened. He was quiet for a moment before sharing a piece of himself. "I grew up in the 9th Ward," he said. "My mom worked 2 jobs. I spent most days trying to stay out of trouble. Didn't always succeed." There was no pride in his voice. Just truth. Bonnie watched him carefully. "That must have been hard." "It taught me a lot," he said. "Like how fast things can be taken from you. How fast you learn to fight for what you want." Their conversations became the start of something neither of them intended. Arden returned the next morning. And the next. Soon, his visits felt like part of the rhythm of the bakery itself. He'd walk in at sunrise, take his usual seat, and wait for Bonnie to bring him coffee. She began telling him more, stories about her childhood, how her grandmother raised her, how she dreamed of expanding the bakery one day. She shared her love for simple things, music drifting from open windows, warm rainstorms, late-night baking sessions. Arden shared more than he planned. Not everything, never everything, but enough for her to see the boy he used to be. The hunger, the fear, the determination to climb out of the circumstances he was born into. Sometimes his voice tightened, and Bonnie would notice how he rubbed the back of his neck when he spoke about his past, as if the memories still weighed on him. She found herself looking forward to those moments, to the quiet warmth in his eyes, to the way he relaxed only around her, to the rare smiles he tried to hide but never quite managed. One morning, as she brought him his usual order, she saw something new, his shoulders easing the moment he looked at her. Something inside her shifted. This was no longer just conversation. It was connection. It was danger wrapped in tenderness. It was a man learning to feel safe in a place filled with flower and sunshine. Soon, it stopped being just mornings. Arden began coming by in the afternoons, offering excuses that sounded thin even to him. Dropping off a box of supplies. Asking for recommendations on pastries. Checking on how the bakery was doing. Bonnie would laugh, shaking her head, but she never asked him to stop. One evening, as she swept the floor before closing, she caught herself thinking about him, not the powerful figure from the gala, but the man who softened when he talked about his mother. The man who lingered at the doorway like he didn't want to leave. The man who remembered how she liked her coffee without her ever telling him. Her chest tightened. She was falling for him. Slowly. Deeply. Unexpectedly. And Arden? He already knew he was in trouble. Because every time he left the bakery, he felt the pull of her warmth, drawing him back like nothing in his world ever had. The rain fell hard that May evening, drumming against the rooftops of the Marigny and turning the streets into silver rivers. Bonnie had been closing the bakery when the lights flickered and went out. She groaned softly, grabbing a candle and lighting it, the small flame shaking against the dark. The storm outside made the neighborhood feel quiet and hollow, except for the constant tapping of water against windows. A loud knock startled her. She opened the door and froze. Arden Presley stood there, soaked through, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, suit clinging to his broad frame. Water dripped from the ends of his sleeves onto her tile floor. He looked almost ridiculous, like a lost puppy, and Bonnie couldn't help but laugh. "You look like you just wrestled the Mississippi," she teased, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face.
He didn't smile. Not immediately.
He stepped inside, shaking off as much water as he could, leaving puddles on the floor. Then he caught her hand, warm and steady, holding it as if the world outside had stopped. His eyes, dark and intense, locked onto hers. "Bonnie," he said, voice low, almost desperate. "I needed to see you." Her chest tightened. She hadn't realized how much she had missed him in a day, how much she craved the calm he brought with his presence. He leaned in, slowly, carefully, giving her a chance to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met softly at first, a gentle brush, then deepened, tasting faintly of powdered sugar from the day's pastries and the possibility of everything they could become. It was tentative and hungry at once, full of longing that neither of them could fully explain. After that night, the world seemed different. The 3 months that followed felt like a dream she didn't want to wake from. They spent evenings at Café Amélie, beneath courtyard stars, talking about anything and nothing. They walked through City Park hand in hand, sharing stories, laughing at old memories, and arguing gently over trivial things like which bayonet was superior or whether the riverboats were overrated. Arden showed her pieces of himself he never showed anyone else: vulnerability, humor, and a quiet protectiveness that wasn't intimidating, only grounding. A weekend trip to Fairhope, Alabama, became a ritual they whispered about for weeks beforehand. They watched sunsets over Mobile Bay, the sky turning shades of orange and pink, and Arden held her close while she leaned her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. They didn't need grand gestures to feel connected. The small moments, the way he brushed flour from her hand, the way she adjusted his tie, the way their laughter mingled, built something neither of them could name but both felt deeply. Bonnie fell in love with him not despite his contradictions but because of them. The man who could command a room with a glance could also sit quietly by her side, letting her speak, letting her be. The man who carried intensity in his every move could soften in ways that made her believe there was gentleness left in the world. She felt seen. She felt safe. And she chose to believe in the goodness he showed her. There were signs she couldn't ignore if she tried. The phone calls he took in another room, conversations hushed and clipped. The way strangers gave him space in public, careful not to interrupt him. The occasional bruises on his knuckles, fading slowly but visible to someone paying attention. The cars he drove, the clothes he wore, expensive, but not from any business she knew of. But Bonnie made a conscious choice. She chose the man who held her hand in the dark, who laughed at her jokes, who listened to her dreams and fears. She chose the man who was real with her, who softened when she needed warmth, and who gave her pieces of himself that mattered more than money, power, or influence. Every day with him deepened her feelings, built a trust that felt unbreakable even in the face of the unknown. Arden became part of her routine, part of her world in a way she didn't know was possible when she had first glanced up from her flour-dusted counter to see him standing there at the bakery door. And for Arden, every smile, every touch, every shared secret pulled him further from the man who had ruled through fear and closer to the one who could rule a heart as easily as an empire. In the rain, in the quiet cafes, on the streets of New Orleans, and in the soft dawns of the Marigny, they found something neither of them expected. A love that was fierce, tender, and entirely their own. The Baton Rouge cruise had been edging into Arden Presley's territory for weeks, testing boundaries, pushing shipments farther north, and sending messages that were meant to provoke. Arden didn't tolerate challenges. He moved quickly, sending his most trusted men to handle the situation with precision. The methods were brutal, leaving marks that couldn't be ignored, warnings written in ways that guaranteed no one forgot the cost of crossing him. In his world, hesitation was weakness, and weakness invited destruction. Bonnie had no idea that her life was about to be touched by the consequences of Arden's world. She went about her mornings at the bakery, kneading dough and checking ovens, while men far from her sight were negotiating the survival of his empire. One evening, after closing, she noticed a car parked just beyond the French market, engine running but empty. It was subtle at first, the kind of thing that could be dismissed as coincidence. But the next evening, the car was there again. Then she began receiving calls where no one spoke, just heavy silence that made her pulse race. When she finally mentioned it to Arden, he changed before her eyes. The gentle, attentive man who listened to her dreams vanished. His jaw tightened, his eyes flat and hard, and she felt the weight of the Arden she had never wanted to see. "Did they touch you?" he asked quietly, voice controlled, like a blade sliding across silk. "No, not yet," Bonnie whispered, her own fear rising. She had always been drawn to the fire in him, the strength that promised protection. Now that same fire made her afraid. Not of what the strangers outside could do, but of the man standing in her kitchen, the one she loved, who now radiated coldness and calculated power. The next morning, the full measure of his response became clear. As Bonnie opened the bakery, she froze. Men stood near the door, eyes scanning the street and the windows. She recognized the type, silent, alert, professional. They weren't just guarding the building, they were watching her, watching everything she did. "Arden," she began, confusion threading her voice. "They are here for your safety," he said, not looking at her. The flatness of his tone made her heart twist. "It's necessary." "But you didn't ask me," she said, her voice rising in disbelief. "You didn't even tell me." His expression didn't change. He was the same man who had held her hand in the dark, who had laughed at her jokes, who had kissed her under May rain. But now there was no softness. Just controlled authority, precision, and a refusal to discuss anything further. The men outside, stationed on the sidewalk and near the windows, shifted slightly, noticing her staring at them. Bonnie felt an unfamiliar heaviness pressing down on her chest. The bakery, once a haven of warmth and light, now felt like a cage. Arden had protected her in ways she didn't want, taking control of her freedom without asking. The realization left her breathless and furious, tangled with a growing sense of vulnerability. She had believed she could trust him completely. Now, that trust was slipping. As days passed, the shadow of his protection stretched over her life. The first time she tried to leave the bakery alone, the men at the door gave her a nod that stopped her mid-step. The walk to Crescent Park, once her favorite escape, was now a carefully measured route with eyes tracking her every move. Streetcars, errands, even quick trips for supplies required his consent, or at least the knowledge that she wouldn't be alone. Bonnie's independence, the thing she had always cherished, had been quietly stripped away. She tried to talk to him about it, sitting across from Arden in his mansion one evening, her hands twisting in her lap. "This is too much," she said. "I can't live like this, Arden. I'm not a child. I need to make my own decisions." He didn't soften. He leaned back, arms crossed, eyes distant but sharp. "Everything I do is for your safety," he said evenly. "You're not safe alone." "But I was fine before you started. Before this," she gestured toward the guards stationed outside her life, "I can take care of myself." "No one else can keep you safe," he replied, voice low, leaving no room for discussion. The arguments became routine, a constant friction that contrasted with the laughter they had shared months before. Where mornings had been filled with easy conversation and soft smiles, now every interaction was measured, tense, heavy. Arden retreated more frequently to his mansion, closing himself off, letting only the necessary parts of himself seep through. Bonnie felt the distance growing, even as she understood his actions came from a place of love. Still, she began to question him. Who was the real Arden? The man who had listened to her dreams, who had laughed at small joys, who had kissed her like the world could be bright and tender. or the man who now dictated her life, who measured every move she made, whose presence loomed like a shadow even when he was not there. She caught herself watching him from the bakery window, wondering if he would notice the change in her expression, the quiet frustration that grew like a vine inside her chest. She loved him, yes, but love was no longer uncomplicated. The juxtaposition of his care and his control created a tension that neither of them could reconcile. She could see the strain in his jaw, the sharpness in his eyes, the brief flickers of helplessness behind his controlled exterior. He was a man trapped between his world and the one he wanted with her, struggling to protect what he loved while unknowingly suffocating it. Bonnie felt caught in that conflict, a passenger in a life where safety and freedom collided violently. She remembered the early days of coffee and laughter, flour on her hands and warmth in her heart, and she mourned the shift. The bakery, once a sanctuary, now carried reminders of everything she had lost since he had stepped into her life with protective intent. And yet, neither of them could pull back completely. Arden's surveillance, his careful watch over her movements, was relentless because of the world he inhabited. Bonnie's longing for normalcy and independence made her resistant, questioning, and increasingly aware of the emotional cage she now lived in. In that delicate, tense balance, the first cracks formed, the beginning of a fracture that neither time, nor love, nor loyalty could ignore. 2 weeks had passed since Arden had stationed men outside the bakery, and Bonnie felt the walls closing in. The streets of Amerine, once full of warmth and morning light, now felt like corridors of surveillance. Every step she took carried the weight of eyes she couldn't see. Even the casual walk to Crescent Park became impossible. She couldn't leave without someone watching her, someone ensuring she stayed safe. Her independence, once as natural as breathing, had been stripped away quietly, so gradually that she hadn't realized how much it meant to her until it was gone. The streetcar ride she used to enjoy, the little luxury of watching the city roll by, became a ritual of fear. Arden insisted she travel only with one of his men, and while their presence was meant to comfort, it only made Bonnie feel like a prisoner in her own neighborhood. Every glance, every whispered conversation between the men, reminded her that her life no longer belonged entirely to her. She tried to speak with Arden, hoping to find compromise. She approached him one evening in the mansion, hands twisting nervously in her apron.
"I can't do this, Arden. I can't live like I'm under constant watch. I don't even feel like I can breathe."
He didn't look at her, his dark eyes fixed on a report he didn't need to show her.
"It's necessary," he said flatly.
"You don't understand the risks." "I understand more than you think," Bonnie said, frustration shaking her voice. "I know danger exists, but I'm not helpless.
I'm not a child.
I can protect myself." "You can't," he replied, tone like steel.
"Not from them. Not from this world.
I'm not risking it."
Arguments became frequent.
What began as conversation devolved into tension, the air thick with things left unsaid. Arden refused to explain his methods or give her even the smallest degree of choice. He only issued commands, cold and unwavering. "Necessary for your safety" became the mantra that hung over every interaction, leaving Bonnie feeling powerless, silenced, trapped. The bakery, once her sanctuary, now carried the weight of surveillance, a constant reminder of how much control he held over her life. She noticed the shift in herself first, hesitation in leaving, anxiety in her steps, the tension in her voice. The freedom she had always taken for granted was gone, replaced by a fragile routine dictated by another person, no matter how much she loved him. Arden's presence in her life, once gentle and warm, had taken on a different rhythm. Where mornings had been filled with soft conversation and laughter, there was now only instruction and observation. He showed up less to share coffee and stories, more to check in, to ensure she was where she was supposed to be. He left the bakery sooner, retreating to his mansion, leaving Bonnie with the echo of his absence and the weight of the unseen men stationed outside.
She began to notice other changes too.
The smile that had softened his eyes during quiet moments was rarer, replaced by the hardness of a man focused on control. The man who had told her his childhood stories, shared pieces of himself, and listened to her with care now seemed distant. He still loved her, she believed, but the way he showed it had transformed into something that felt suffocating, rather than freeing.
Bonnie found herself questioning everything.
Who was the Arden she had fallen in love with? The man who had laughed with her over flour-dusted hands and early morning coffee, who had kissed her in the rain with warmth and tenderness? Or the Arden who now dictated every step of her life, whose eyes were cold with calculation, whose presence reminded her of rules and caution instead of comfort and safety? The internal conflict tore at her. She loved him, yes, but love wasn't supposed to feel like imprisonment. And yet, she still feared the world outside his protection. The very thing that made him so terrifying now was what kept her alive in ways she could not fully measure. She began avoiding the window, avoiding the streets she had once loved. Every movement was measured, every choice filtered through the lens of caution, as if she were living someone else's life. The bakery, the smell of fresh bread, the morning sun, everything that had once grounded her now felt tainted with control. At night, when she returned home to her apartment above the bakery, the quiet brought no comfort. Arden's absence left her alone with the weight of surveillance, the knowledge that someone was always observing. She ached for the early days when he had leaned across the counter, sharing his thoughts, listening to hers, letting her feel the warmth of connection instead of the cold pressure of protection.
Their arguments had begun to erode trust.
Bonnie questioned everything about their relationship, wondering if the man who had kissed her with vulnerability still existed beneath the armor. She worried that she had never truly known him at all, that the love she felt had been for a version of him carefully curated, one that no longer reflected the man dictating her every move. Even small gestures, once comforting, now carried tension. A touch on her arm, meant to reassure, felt controlling. A glance in the doorway, meant to check her safety, felt like surveillance. The line between protection and possession had blurred, leaving Bonnie unsure how to navigate her feelings. Despite this, she loved him. And that love made her hesitation all the more painful. She couldn't deny the warmth he brought in private, the fleeting moments where he softened, where she glimpsed the man she had fallen for. Those moments reminded her why she stayed, why she tolerated the suffocating rules, why she hoped for a balance she didn't yet know could exist.
But the reality pressed in relentlessly.
The distance between them grew, punctuated by arguments, long silences, and Arden's increasing withdrawal to the mansion. Bonnie felt the relationship shifting beneath her fingers.
Intimacy gave way to distance. Laughter gave way to tension.
Trust, once implicit, now required negotiation she wasn't sure she could manage.
The suffocation had begun.
And with it, the fear that perhaps love alone was not enough to survive in the space between Arden's world and her own. The September heat pressed against the windows of Bonnie's apartment above the bakery, turning the room into a furnace. The sun had long disappeared, leaving only the heavy, sticky warmth that clung to her skin. Bonnie sat on the edge of a small couch, the exhaustion of the day weighing her down. Kneading dough, attending customers, and walking under the constant scrutiny of Arden's guards had left her physically tired, but the real fatigue was deeper. It came from living in a life that felt increasingly borrowed, stolen, and dictated by someone else, even someone she loved. The clock struck 8, and the bell at her door rang. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Arden walked in, carrying his presence like a shadow. The hollow routine of his visits had become unbearable, the comfort she once felt in his arms now replaced by tension and unspoken rules. "Bonnie," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the room. She looked up at him, hands gripping the edge of the couch.
"Arden," she murmured, voice tight. "We need to talk." He nodded, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "I know," he replied. The silence stretched, heavy and deliberate.
Finally, she stood, moving closer, her anger brimming over the fatigue.
I can't do this anymore. I can't live like I'm trapped in my own life.
I can't, Arden, I can't be with someone who treats me like property instead of a partner.
Arden's jaw tightened.
I'm protecting you, he said, his voice controlled, but with a sharp edge that betrayed the tension beneath. Protecting me? Bonnie laughed bitterly, shaking her head. This isn't protection. You've taken away my freedom, my choices, my life.
Do you even see that?
I do, he said, the words clipped, precise. And I'm doing it because I love you. That's the problem, she shot back, pacing the small apartment. You think love means control.
You think love means fear and rules.
That's not love, Arden. I don't want to be safe if it means I can't breathe. Arden ran a hand over his face, frustration and helplessness crossing the features she had once found comforting.
I can't risk it, he said quietly. I can't risk losing you.
I can't let them.
They.
Bonnie cut in sharply, her voice trembling.
Who? What have you done that you can't tell me about?
What is so terrible you can't let me see? Arden froze. His hands unclenched, then clenched again. He took a step toward her, but she stepped back instinctively, the space between them charged with tension. The man she loved, the one she had trusted, now looked like someone else entirely. Someone both familiar and unknowable. I can't tell you, he said finally, his voice low, heavy. Because if I do, you'll never look at me the same way again. Bonnie's eyes filled with tears, a mixture of heartbreak, frustration, and disbelief. You mean to tell me that the man I love, the man I trusted, is holding pieces of his life from me because he thinks I can't handle the truth?
Yes, he whispered.
I'm sorry. The words landed like a blow. Bonnie felt her chest tighten, her knees weak.
She sank back onto the couch, the room spinning with exhaustion and sorrow.
I can't do this, she said, voice breaking.
I can't be in love with someone who won't let me in. I
love you, Arden, but I can't live like this anymore.
I can't.
Her hands trembled as she continued.
I need you to remove the guards. I need you to leave me alone. I need my life back.
Arden's face tightened, every muscle in his body taut with restraint. He looked at her with a mixture of pleading and anguish, the conflict in his eyes clear. He wanted to argue, to explain, to pull her into his arms and convince her that his world made her safe. But he knew he couldn't. He knew that in trying to keep her, he had broken something that could never be repaired without honesty he wasn't willing to give.
He began, voice faltering.
He took a step closer, but she didn't move. His hand twitched, a desire to reach out to her clashing with the knowledge that doing so would only bind her further.
He swallowed hard.
I'll do it, he said finally. I'll remove them. I'll leave you alone. Bonnie's tears fell freely now. Thank you, she whispered, her voice ragged. She had never felt so exhausted, so empty, so torn.
She wanted him to stay. She wanted him to hold her and tell her everything would be fine.
But she also knew she couldn't live under the weight of his love when it came with these invisible chains. Arden nodded slowly, stepping back. The quiet was thick between them, full of all the words they hadn't said, the moments they couldn't reclaim. He looked at her one last time, memorizing the curve of her shoulders, the way her hair fell across her face, the tears that she refused to wipe away. Each step he took toward the door felt like a jagged slice through his chest. Goodbye, Bonnie, he said quietly, the words a whisper, almost lost under the hum of the city outside. Goodbye, Arden, she replied, her voice breaking as her heart shattered in rhythm with his. The door closed behind him. Bonnie sank against the wall, her arms wrapped around her knees, and allowed herself to weep. The room felt emptier than it ever had,
even without the storm of surveillance that had haunted her days. The freedom she had reclaimed carried a hollow victory, a bitter taste alongside the relief. Arden's footsteps echoed in the hallway outside the apartment building as he descended the stairs. Each step away from her felt like a fracture of his own heart. Every inch he put between them was a reminder of the love he could not fully share, the trust he could not fully earn, and the man he had become to keep her safe. By the time he reached the street, the night had deepened. The city hummed quietly around him, indifferent to the devastation he carried. He walked with a rigidity that betrayed his control over every movement, but inside, the weight of what he had done pressed heavily against his chest. He had loved her fiercely, but in trying to protect her, he had destroyed the very connection that made him human. Bonnie remained in her apartment long after his footsteps faded, tracing the spaces he had occupied with her eyes. The warmth of their early mornings, the laughter over coffee, the shared glances across the bakery counter, all of it lingered like ghosts. She knew she had made the right decision for herself, but the knowledge did little to stop the ache in her chest, the emptiness that settled deep in her bones. They had loved each other completely, and yet completely apart. Arden had walked out to give her freedom, but in doing so, had left two hearts shattered in parallel. Hers for the loss of the man she had loved, his for the knowledge that protection had cost him the only person who made him want to be more than what the world demanded. The apartment was silent, except for her soft, uneven breathing. The bakery below would open tomorrow, and life would continue, but the weight of the evening hung heavy, a memory neither of them could ignore. They had broken, not from lack of love, but from the impossibility of merging two worlds, one of passion, tenderness, and trust, the other of danger, control, and the unforgiving rules Arden lived by. And somewhere deep in the city, Arden walked into the night, carrying her absence like a wound, every step a reminder of what he had loved and lost. The mansion on St. Charles Avenue felt emptier than ever. Arden sat in the grand room, high ceilings stretching above him, the silence pressing down like a weight. He had thrown himself into his work since leaving Bonnie's apartment that night, but the intensity was different now. It wasn't the controlled focus of a man building an empire. It was reckless, violent, almost punishing. Every decision, every confrontation, carried the edge of someone trying to bury a personal pain beneath action, to replace loss with force. He met challenges with disproportionate responses, sending messages to rivals with a ferocity that surprised even his most seasoned men. Every shipment protected, every encroachment punished, became a proxy for the emptiness inside him. Arden's empire had always demanded attention and fear, but now it also absorbed his grief, offering a way to act without confronting the hollow space Bonnie had left. Even as he moved through his world of power and intimidation, part of him remained tied to her. He had removed the guards from the bakery as promised, giving her freedom, but the protection he could not fully relinquish remained subtle and invisible. Men watched from a distance, reporting on her daily routine, ensuring that threats from Baton Rouge never reached her. He could not intervene, could not touch, but he could make sure she remained untouched by danger, the only way he could still care from afar. Reports came in regularly. She was back to her routines, tending the bakery, greeting regulars with polite smiles, cleaning counters and folding dough with her usual efficiency. Arden read each one carefully, noting every detail. She looked well, and yet her eyes, the way they moved over the room, carried a subtle sadness. He remembered the laughter she had brought to his mornings, the warmth of her hand in his, the soft way she had leaned against him in the storm. Those images haunted him more fiercely than any rival ever had. Bonnie's life, while technically restored, had changed irrevocably. She threw herself into the bakery, the comfort of routine acting as a shield against the ache in her chest. Friends stopped by, bringing chatter and light, trying to coax the smiles back to her face. And she smiled, carefully, mechanically at times, forcing the warmth that Arden had once seen so naturally. But at night, alone in the apartment above the bakery,
the memories of him returned unbidden. She remembered how he had looked at her under the May rain, how he had listened to her stories, laughed at her jokes, held her hand as if the world could do nothing to them. Sometimes she would close her eyes and feel the echo of his presence in the small apartment, like a shadow of the man she had loved. The gentle parts of him, the tenderness he reserved for her, clung to her memories, leaving both a comfort and a wound that refused to heal. Her heart remembered everything her mind tried to rationalize. She had made the choice to reclaim her life, but her body, her emotions, her heart, all resisted. In the city, Arden moved through nights and days that were full but hollow. Meetings, calls, decisions. They demanded him, yet they were no replacement for Bonnie's presence. He would catch himself thinking of her laugh, the way her hair fell loose from her braid, the flower still under her fingernails from the day's work. He remembered her eyes when she looked at him like he was good, like she believed in him beyond the world he had created. And every time he did, the empire, the power, the violence, it all felt meaningless. He saw her from afar, in reports, and in fleeting shadows on the streets, though she never knew it. The protection he maintained was silent, a constant in the background of her restored independence. She was free to walk, to breathe, to exist, without ever realizing that a man who loved her more than his own life still watched, still cared, from a distance she could not know. Both of them were broken in parallel. Bonnie had freedom, yes, but freedom that carried the ghost of love and loss. Arden had power, yes, but power that could not fill the void she had left in his life. The world moved forward around them, people going about their business, the bakery opening, the city's rhythm continuing. And yet, in separate corners of their lives, they both carried the weight of a love that could not reconcile with the rules Arden had chosen to impose. In the quiet moments, the loneliness and longing became a mirror. Bonnie would touch the counter, the table where he had once sat with her, and feel the absence sharply. Arden would lean over a map, tracing routes for shipments, and feel the hollowness that only her smile could fill. Both loved, both missed, both mourned the connection that had defined their lives, now fractured by fear, control, and unspoken truths. Neither knew how to reach across the divide. Words were unspoken, gestures withheld, both believing the other had chosen the separation. Arden thought he had given her the one gift she had begged for, her life back. Bonnie thought she had reclaimed herself, choosing freedom over the suffocation of love that had become protection. And yet, both felt the absence as deeply as if the other had died. It was a quiet suffering, measured and constant, each day stacking on the next. The parallel pain was unacknowledged but undeniable. Every choice, every action they took separately, carried the shadow of what had been. They were two people broken, connected still by love, yet separated by the walls they had helped build. In the city, the bakery continued to smell of fresh bread and sugar. Patrons returned, unaware of the silent heartbreak above the storefront. Arden's empire continued, ruthless and untouchable, yet within him, a personal destruction had taken root. Both existed in a world that demanded movement and survival, but the moments when they were alone, when the quiet of the night allowed memory to surface, they remembered everything. The laughter, the warmth, the tenderness, and the ache returned with every heartbeat. And beneath the weight of parallel grief, an invisible thread remained. Neither could yet bridge it, but neither could forget. Arden, in his solitude, and Bonnie, in her reclaimed freedom, both held a space for the other that would not fade. It was a quiet, waiting tension, a promise of something unresolved, a catalyst poised to bring them back together. For now, though, they were broken, each struggling to exist in the lives they had chosen apart from each other, haunted by the love that had been too intense to survive under the same roof, yet too deep to disappear entirely. Bonnie woke with a start in the early hours, coughing and gagging against a wall of smoke that filled her small apartment. The clock glowed 3:07 a.m.
Her heart pounded as she scrambled out of bed in her pajamas, choking against the thick, acrid air. The heat pressed against her chest as she dashed down the stairs, her bare feet burning against the hardwood. Through the haze, she saw flames devouring the bakery below. Windows shattered, wood splintered, the familiar smell of flour and sugar replaced by smoke and fire. 3 generations of her family's legacy were being swallowed, and she could do nothing but watch. Her hands trembled, soot covering her arms and face. She fell to the curb outside, gasping for air, the city silent around her except for the crackling of the fire. Her knees sank into the asphalt as she pressed her face into her hands. Years of morning routines, laughter, and the warmth of generations gone. Everything she had built and loved was gone in moments. And beneath the terror, a dreadful understanding took root. This wasn't random. Someone had wanted her life, her heart, destroyed. She shivered, tears mingling with grime and sweat. In that moment of clarity, Bonnie realized what she had avoided thinking about for weeks. The freedom Arden had given her, the absence of guards, the absence of control, had left her exposed to the very world that haunted him. His enemies had found her, and she had been helpless. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it at first, staring at the ruins, unwilling to believe anyone could matter more than the smoke that consumed everything. Then the buzzing became insistent. It was Arden. Her pulse jumped, a wave of fear and relief washing over her. She answered, her voice trembling. "Bonnie, are you?" His voice cracked mid-sentence, tense, filled with panic. "Bonnie, where are you? Are you alive?" I'm outside," she whispered, still on the curb, eyes fixed on the flames. "The bakery, it's—" She couldn't form the words. They fell away into gasps and sobs. "I'm coming," he said sharply. "Stay there. Don't move." The line went dead. Panic overtook him completely. Arden abandoned the meeting he had traveled to Baton Rouge for, leaving his men and plans behind. Every careful decision, every distance he had maintained since their breakup, evaporated in an instant. His heart lurched in his chest as he raced toward New Orleans, tires screaming against the highway, hands gripping the wheel like a lifeline. By the time he reached the Marigny, the sky was beginning to pale with dawn, smoke curling into the soft morning light. And there she was, sitting on the curb, small, broken, and coated in ash. He slowed to a stop, chest heaving, eyes taking in the sight that made every breath he had taken over the past 2 months feel like a lie. She looked fragile in ways she had never appeared before, her pajamas damp with soot, her hair sticking to her face, her body shaking from shock and cold. Bonnie looked up as he approached, and instead of anger or reproach, her eyes carried relief. Her voice, husky and broken, escaped before she could stop it. "You came." "Always," Arden whispered, kneeling beside her. He reached for her hands, covering them in his larger, calloused ones. The heat of his body, the strength in his grip, was a tether against the chaos that had swallowed her world. She leaned into him instinctively, the barriers built in the past 2 months melting under the gravity of the moment. For a long time, neither spoke. The fire roared behind them, sending smoke into the sky, but all Arden could see was her. The city's noises, the distant sirens, the crackling flames, the murmurs of onlookers, faded into nothing. All that existed was the woman he loved, scared and trembling, and the fear that he had almost lost her forever. He pressed a gentle kiss to her temple, soot and ash smudging across his lips. "I'm here," he murmured. "You're safe. You're alive." Her lips pressed against his chest, and she shivered, exhausted beyond anything she had known in her life. The bakery was gone, and yet somehow, in this moment, it didn't matter. She had been spared, and he was here. He hadn't abandoned her completely to the dangers of his world, even if he had allowed distance and rules to come between them. Tears streamed down both their faces. Arden's mind reeled with guilt, relief, and love so intense it felt unbearable. Bonnie clung to him, holding on like letting go could mean losing him for good. He held her tighter, aware of the fragility of this life, the fragility of love. 1 second, everything could change. 1 moment, a choice could destroy everything. The fire continued behind them, but Arden could only think of the moments before, 2 months of quiet suffering, of distance, of both of them hurting in parallel. And now, here she was, alive. And for the first time since their breakup, it felt possible to face the truth together. "I don't want lies anymore," Bonnie whispered, lifting her face to meet his. "If I almost died tonight because of your world, I deserve the truth. No more protecting me from reality. Tell me everything, Arden." He nodded, swallowing hard, the weight of the months of silence pressing down. The morning air was thick with smoke and ash, but the tension between them burned hotter. Arden knew he couldn't protect her from the entirety of his world. He couldn't control everything. He could only offer honesty and the choice to face it together. Bonnie's hands, still smudged with soot, gripped his arms. "I need to know. I can't go back to not knowing. I can't live with secrets anymore. If I'm with you, I need truth." Arden looked down at her, the vulnerability in her gaze cutting deeper than any bullet or threat ever could. He took a deep breath. "You have a right to know. I've built my life with blood, with decisions that I've kept from you to protect you. The rivalry with Baton Rouge, the threats you faced, they were always connected to me. I never wanted you to be a target, but my world found you anyway." Bonnie's eyes filled again, tears streaking through the soot. "I thought leaving you gave me freedom, gave me safety," she whispered. "It didn't. It only left me alone." Arden's hand reached to cup her cheek, brushing away a line of ash. "I can't leave my world, Bonnie. But I can be honest with you. I can let you decide how much you can handle. You won't face it alone anymore." Her breath caught. "Then at least if I'm with you, I'll know what I'm facing. And I won't be going through it alone." He pressed his forehead to hers. "Together," he murmured. The fire burned behind them, but in that quiet dawn, amid the smoke and ruin, something fragile yet unbreakable began to form again. The possibility of love rebuilt on truth, trust, and the recognition of its delicate power. Bonnie woke with a start in the early hours, coughing and gagging against a wall of smoke that filled her small apartment. The clock glowed 3:07 a.m. Her heart pounded as she scrambled out of bed in her pajamas, choking against the thick, acrid air. The heat pressed against her chest as she dashed down the stairs, her bare feet burning against the hardwood. Through the haze, she saw flames devouring the bakery below. Windows shattered, wood splintered, the familiar smell of flour and sugar replaced by smoke and fire. 3 generations of her family's legacy were being swallowed, and she could do nothing but watch. Her hands trembled, soot covering her arms and face. She fell to the curb outside, gasping for air, the city silent around her except for the crackling of the fire. Her knees sank into the asphalt as she pressed her face into her hands. Years of morning routines, laughter, and the warmth of generations gone. Everything she had built and loved was gone in moments. And beneath the terror, a dreadful understanding took root. This wasn't random. Someone had wanted her life, her heart, destroyed. She shivered, tears mingling with grime and sweat. In that moment of clarity, Bonnie realized what she had avoided thinking about for weeks. The freedom Arden had given her, the absence of guards, the absence of control, had left her exposed to the very world that haunted him. His enemies had found her, and she had been helpless. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it at first, staring at the ruins, unwilling to believe anyone could matter more than the smoke that consumed everything. Then the buzzing became insistent. It was Arden. Her pulse jumped, a wave of fear and relief washing over her. She answered, her voice trembling. Bonnie, are you? His voice cracked mid-sentence, tense, filled with panic. Bonnie, where are you? Are you alive? I'm outside, she whispered, still on the curb, eyes fixed on the flames. The bakery, she couldn't form the words. They fell away into gasps and sobs. I'm coming, he said sharply. Stay there. Don't move. The line went dead. Panic overtook him completely. Arden abandoned the meeting he had traveled to Baton Rouge for, leaving his men and plans behind. Every careful decision, every distance he had maintained since their breakup, evaporated in an instant. His heart lurched in his chest as he raced toward New Orleans, tires screaming against the highway, hands gripping the wheel like a lifeline. By the time he reached the Marigny, the sky was beginning to pale with dawn, smoke curling into the soft morning light. And there she was, sitting on the curb, small, broken, and coated in ash. He slowed to a stop, chest heaving, eyes taking in the sight that made every breath he had taken over the past 2 months feel like a lie. She looked fragile in ways she had never appeared before, her pajamas damp with soot, her hair sticking to her face, her body shaking from shock and cold. Bonnie looked up as he approached, and instead of anger or reproach, her eyes carried relief. Her voice, husky and broken, escaped before she could stop it. You came. Always, Arden whispered, kneeling beside her. He reached for her hands, covering them in his larger, calloused ones. The heat of his body, the strength in his grip, was a tether against the chaos that had swallowed her world. She leaned into him instinctively, the barriers built in the past 2 months melting under the gravity of the moment. For a long time, neither spoke. The fire roared behind them, sending smoke into the sky, but all Arden could see was her. The city's noises, the distant sirens, the crackling flames, the murmurs of onlookers, faded into nothing. All that existed was the woman he loved, scared and trembling, and the fear that he had almost lost her forever. He pressed a gentle kiss to her temple, soot and ash smudging across his lips. I'm here, he murmured. You're safe. You're alive. Her lips pressed against his chest, and she shivered, exhausted beyond anything she had known in her life. The bakery was gone, and yet somehow, in this moment, it didn't matter. She had been spared, and he was here. He hadn't abandoned her completely to the dangers of his world, even if he had allowed distance and rules to come between them. Tears streamed down both their faces. Arden's mind reeled with guilt, relief, and love so intense it felt unbearable. Bonnie clung to him, holding on like letting go could mean losing him for good. He held her tighter, aware of the fragility of this life, the fragility of love. 1 second, everything could change. 1 moment, a choice could destroy everything. The fire continued behind them, but Arden could only think of the moments before, 2 months of quiet suffering, of distance, of both of them hurting in parallel. And now, here she was, alive, and for the first time since their breakup, it felt possible to face the truth together. I don't want lies anymore, Bonnie whispered, lifting her face to meet his. If I almost died tonight because of your world, I deserve the truth. No more protecting me from reality. Tell me everything, Arden. He nodded, swallowing hard, the weight of the months of silence pressing down. The morning air was thick with smoke and ash, but the tension between them burned hotter. Arden knew he couldn't protect her from the entirety of his world. He couldn't control everything. He could only offer honesty and the choice to face it together. Bonnie's hands, still smudged with soot, gripped his arms. I need to know. I can't go back to not knowing. I can't live with secrets anymore. If I'm with you, I need truth. Arden looked down at her, the vulnerability in her gaze cutting deeper than any bullet or threat ever could. He took a deep breath. You have a right to know. I've built my life with blood, with decisions that I've kept from you to protect you. The rivalry with Baton Rouge, the threats you faced, they were always connected to me. I never wanted you to be a target, but my world found you anyway. Bonnie's eyes filled again, tears streaking through the soot. I thought leaving you gave me freedom, gave me safety, she whispered. It didn't. It only left me alone. Arden's hand reached to cup her cheek, brushing away a line of ash. I can't leave my world, Bonnie. But I can be honest with you. I can let you decide how much you can handle. You won't face it alone anymore. Her breath caught. Then at least if I'm with you, I'll know what I'm facing. And I won't be going through it alone. He pressed his forehead to hers. Together, he murmured. The fire burned behind them. But in that quiet dawn, amid the smoke and ruin, something fragile yet unbreakable began to form again. The possibility of love rebuilt on truth, trust, and the recognition of its delicate power. The smoke still curled lazily into the early morning sky, the remnants of ash settling on the street and the curb where Bonnie had spent hours trembling. She stayed on the sidewalk, soot streaked across her face, her hands gripping the straps of her nightgown as if they could anchor her to reality. Arden had knelt beside her at first, holding her like she might shatter into the wind, but now she pulled back slightly, looking at him with fierce determination. I'm done, she said, voice low but steady. I'm done with the half-truths, the secrets, the pretending everything is fine. If I almost died tonight because of your world, I deserve to know everything. No more protecting me from reality. I need honesty, Arden. All of it. He looked down at her, his jaw tight, eyes shadowed with the weight of years he had carried alone. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the city with pale gold light that reflected off the remnants of smoke. Arden exhaled slowly. You have a right to know, he admitted, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. I didn't tell you before because I wanted to shield you, because I wanted you safe. But safe isn't the same as alive, is it? Bonnie shook her head, lips pressed into a thin line. No, it isn't. And I don't want to be just alive, Arden. I want to live, and I want to know who I'm living with. I can't love a man I don't understand. He closed his eyes for a moment, then began. I build my life on decisions that most people wouldn't understand. I run operations, control territories, manage rivals. Baton Rouge has been encroaching on what I've built for 20 years, and they've been ruthless. Every step I take is calculated, every move measured. And when they realize that you are the one I care about, they try to hurt you, to hurt me through you. Bonnie listened, her fingers brushing ash from her cheek, the morning light catching in her tear-streaked hair. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She simply let him speak, absorbing the truth, letting it wash over her like bitter rain. I kept men watching you, even after we broke up, he continued, his voice rough. I thought that giving you freedom was the right thing. I thought I could balance distance with safety. But they found a way in, and I couldn't protect you. That's on me. His gaze fell to the street below, then back to her. Everything I've done, everything I've built, it all comes with a cost. And tonight, the cost nearly became yours. Bonnie's chest heaved. She felt the anger and fear from the past 2 months rise up, but they were tempered by something deeper, understanding. She hadn't run away. She had faced the truth. She had seen him racing back to her, the panic in his movements, the way his hands shook when he finally saw her alive. The man she had loved, the one who had listened to her dreams, laughed at her stories, held her hand with a tenderness unmatched, was still there, even if buried under the weight of his world. I left you to protect myself, she said quietly, letting the words hang in the air. I thought leaving meant I'd be safe. But it didn't. I was alone, Arden. And I realized that freedom without you isn't freedom at all. I don't condone your world, not entirely, but I can't pretend it doesn't exist. I can't walk away from you because I'm scared.
That doesn't mean I accept everything, but I won't run anymore. Arden's shoulders sagged with relief and exhaustion. He took a step closer, closing the distance that had existed between them for too long. I can't leave my world, Bunny. I can't stop who I am, or the choices I've made. But I can be honest with you from now on. I can let you choose how much of it you can handle, and I can let you stand beside me instead of behind me or apart from me.
Will you let me do that?
Her gaze met his, unwavering.
I'm not asking you to change who you are. I want honesty, Arden. Trust me enough to let me decide what I can handle.
If we're together, I need the truth, even when it hurts.
And I need to know that I'm not alone in it.
A quiet tension settled between them, filled with the weight of all they had been through and the promise of what could be. Arden's hand rose slowly, brushing against hers, fingers intertwining. At least if I'm with you, Bonnie whispered, her voice soft but resolute. I'll know what I'm facing. And I won't be going through it alone.
He drew a shaky breath and nodded.
Then we face it together. The city around them continued to wake, the distant sounds of streetcars, early morning voices, and barking dogs mixing with the last whispers of smoke drifting from the bakery. The devastation behind them reminded them of fragility, of risk, of the cost of love in a world filled with danger. But in that moment, Arden and Bonnie were no longer two people broken apart. They were two people choosing honesty, choosing trust, choosing each other. She leaned into him, letting the warmth of his body anchor her against the cold reality of the ruined bakery. We'll rebuild, she said softly, voice steadier now. Not just the bakery, Arden. Us. Our life. We'll rebuild it stronger this time, on truth, not illusions. He pressed his forehead to hers, the intensity of the moment binding them in ways words could not. I swear to you, he murmured. I will be honest. I won't hide from you anymore. We face everything together. Nothing will come between us again, Bonnie. Her lips curved into a tired but genuine smile. Then we start now. The morning sun crested fully over New Orleans, illuminating the ruins, the ash, and the two people standing among it. One had been broken by love withheld, the other by love restrained, but together they found a new beginning. For the first time in months, neither felt trapped, neither felt powerless. They had chosen transparency, trust, and the courage to stand together. The fire had nearly destroyed her world, but it had also burned away the pretense, the silence, and the fear. In the quiet aftermath, as smoke rose like gray ribbons into the sky, Arden and Bonnie understood that the foundation of love wasn't control or protection. It was honesty, vulnerability, and the willingness to face danger and uncertainty together. And as the city stirred around them, they took the first steps toward rebuilding. Not just a bakery, not just a life, but a love tempered by truth and fortified by the choice to remain steadfast, even when the world demanded otherwise. The smell of sawdust and fresh paint replaced the acrid smoke that had filled the bakery weeks ago. Contractors moved methodically through the space, measuring, hammering, and painting, while Bonnie oversaw every detail with a careful eye. She pointed at shelves, debated the color of the walls, and argued about the layout of the ovens. Arden stood nearby, sometimes holding tools, sometimes letting the workmen pass by as he watched her. He had returned to his world briefly each day, but he always made time for this, his presence a constant reminder that he would never let her rebuild alone. He appeared most mornings, just as the sun broke over the rooftops, sleeves rolled up, hands smudged with paint or dusted with plaster. There were days when the calluses of his life showed through, blood on his knuckles from previous meetings he hadn't had time to wash, a reminder of the world he could not leave. And yet, when he knelt to help lift a countertop, or held a ladder steady while Bonnie climbed to inspect a new light fixture, he was simply Arden, the man she loved, not the man the city feared. The work became a rhythm, a ritual of creation that mirrored what they were building together. Their conversations, once tense and fractured, became careful negotiations of life and love. Bonnie was firm about her boundaries. She did not want details about his business, not because she was naive, but because she needed to separate his danger from her peace. Arden respected that, explaining risks in broad strokes, ensuring she understood without overwhelming her with the darkness he managed daily. They learned together how to balance honesty with protection, trust with caution. Arden had changed in ways that were subtle but vital. He delegated more, trusting others to handle confrontations he might once have faced himself. He did not abandon his empire, but he led it with people and systems that kept him from constant direct involvement in violence. It was an imperfect solution, but it allowed him to carve space for Bonnie, for the life they were slowly rebuilding. He showed up in the bakery not as a protector or enforcer, but as a partner, a presence she could rely on without fear. The intimacy between them shifted in this period. Gone were the illusions and half-truths of their first relationship. Now, they were real, complicated, sometimes difficult, but grounded in truth. Bonnie found herself laughing at small things again, sharing flour-covered jokes as she kneaded dough, while Arden listened without judgment, his hand brushing hers as he guided her around a stubborn counter or reached to adjust a window shutter. The gentle touches, the quiet attention, were milestones of trust being rebuilt. Evenings were sometimes quiet, sitting among the boards and scattered tools, discussing how the bakery would operate once open, and what life together would look like outside of this space. Bonnie would express her fears, her hopes, and Arden would respond with openness, admitting what he could not change, but promising where he could compromise. The conversations were intense at times, but they built understanding. She realized he could not give her control over everything, but he could give her partnership, and that was enough. During this time, Arden also began to reveal more of himself in measured ways. Stories of his childhood in the Ninth Ward, the hunger he had felt, the weight of his mother's struggles, these were not confessions of weakness, but of trust. Bonnie listened, absorbing his history, understanding that the man she loved had been forged by pain and resilience. She did not flinch from the darkness entirely, but she learned to see the light that existed alongside it, the gentleness he reserved only for her. 3 months passed quickly, each day a testament to patience, commitment, and the slow rekindling of love. The bakery, once reduced to ashes, now stood strong again, polished and full of life. And through it, so too had their relationship grown stronger. Every nail hammered, every tile laid, every brushstroke painted became part of the architecture of their bond. They were not perfect, and neither was the life they were building, but it was theirs, real and unshakable because it was based on honesty, not illusions or control. The final day of reconstruction arrived with sunlight spilling into the bakery, dust motes dancing in the rays as Bonnie inspected every detail one last time. Arden stood beside her, leaning against a countertop, hands resting lightly on the surface. He caught her gaze and smiled, a slow, unguarded smile that reached his eyes and made her heart skip. "You did it," he said softly. "We did it," she corrected, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Together." And in that moment, surrounded by the scent of fresh dough and new beginnings, they understood something fundamental. Rebuilding wasn't just about repairing what had been lost. It was about creating something stronger, grounded in truth, tempered by patience, and held together by love that had faced the flames and survived. Arden and Bonnie had found that love again, and this time, it was real, unshakable, and theirs to nurture. The morning of the bakery reopening arrived with a crisp breeze and the chatter of neighbors filling the Marigny streets. Bonnie's hands trembled slightly as she tied her apron, not from nerves about the work, but from the flood of emotion at seeing her life restored. The smell of fresh bread and sugar drifted out into the street as she opened the doors. One by one, familiar faces appeared, neighbors, friends, regular customers, and curious passers-by, all drawn to witness the triumph over the fire that had nearly destroyed her world. Arden stayed at his usual corner table, a quiet sentinel among the celebration. He watched Bonnie move through the crowd with her characteristic grace, greeting everyone with warmth and laughter. From time to time, he would glance at Clarice, Bonnie's protective best friend, who gave him a sharp look that said, "Without words, don't mess this up." He responded with a nod, and in a rare, unguarded moment, admitted aloud, "If I ever hurt her again, I will destroy myself more thoroughly than anyone else could." Clarice raised an eyebrow, her lips twitching in a small smile. Arden's admission was heavy with sincerity, and in that moment, he felt the full weight of responsibility for the woman he loved. As the crowd gradually thinned, Bonnie emerged from the kitchen with a plate of bayonets and offered one to Arden. He accepted, smiling, the tension in his shoulders easing. "It's good to see the bakery full again," he said softly. "Not just the bakery," Bonnie replied, her gaze lingering on him. "Us, too." The evening brought them into the French Quarter. The streets glowed with the golden light of lamps, and the distant Mississippi shimmered under the moon's reflection. They walked past Jackson Square, hands brushing lightly, enjoying the rhythm of the city that had always been their home yet felt new after everything they had endured. "I never thought I was capable of real happiness," Arden said suddenly, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I thought life was about control, about power, about survival. And then, I met you. You made me see that happiness is different. It's not about possession or fear. It's about choosing someone, every day, even when there's risk." Bonnie stopped, turning to him. "I've learned something too," she said. "Love isn't about changing someone or controlling them. It's about trusting them, letting them choose you every day, and accepting what you can't change. Life isn't perfect, Arden, but I've realized that the imperfections are worth it if we choose to face them together." He smiled, a mixture of awe and relief in his eyes. "Then we choose each other," he said simply. The day of the reopening celebration carried into a quiet evening. Arden took Bonnie's hand, kneeling slightly on one knee near the bakery entrance. His eyes, usually guarded and sharp, were vulnerable and open. "Spend forever with me?" he asked, voice steady but filled with emotion. Tears welled in Bonnie's eyes, and she nodded, a laugh of disbelief and joy escaping her lips. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Arden." The weeks that followed were filled with small, profound moments of intimacy and reassurance. Their November wedding at the Cabildo in the French Quarter was simple, surrounded by a few close friends and family. The ceremony was intimate. Arden's vows promised to be worthy of Bonnie's love, to always be honest even when it was difficult, and to let her choose him every day. Bonnie's vows promised to stand beside him, accepting him fully, the darkness he could not leave and the light he freely shared with her. The day after the wedding, they returned to the bakery, now humming with life and laughter. Arden helped unpack crates of ingredients, his hands brushing against Bonnie's as they worked side by side. The act of rebuilding together had extended into this next chapter, reinforcing the bond that had been tested by fire, fear, and distance. They walked along the river that evening, the Mississippi reflecting the fading light of day. Arden spoke softly. "I've learned that love isn't control. It isn't protection from everything that could hurt you. It's trust, vulnerability, and willingness to face the world together. You've taught me that, Bonnie." She smiled, leaning into him. "And you've taught me that love isn't simple. It's messy, it's complicated, but it's worth every risk. You're worth every risk." The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cobblestones, but neither of them felt darkness. They had survived storms, fire, and fear, and had come through with a bond stronger than either could have imagined. The bakery, once reduced to ashes, now stood as a symbol of resilience. Their love, tested and proven, was just as enduring.
Arden pressed a gentle kiss to Bonnie's temple, and she looked up at him with a steady gaze. "Together," she said. "Always," he replied. And in that simple affirmation, they understood something essential. Love's power was not in domination or control, but in the fragile courage to trust, to choose each other daily, and to accept both darkness and light. They had found forever, not in perfection, but in the willingness to build a life together despite everything. Life together was not perfect. Arden still returned late from his meetings, sometimes exhausted, his eyes carrying the weight of decisions no one else could make. There were evenings when Bonnie felt a flicker of fear, remembering the dangers that had shadowed their lives. But alongside that fear, there were mornings when Arden watched her sleep, her hair spilling across the pillow, her chest rising and falling with quiet certainty. He would trace a finger along her arm and whisper, almost to himself, "How did I get this lucky?" And there were moments, small but profound, when he appeared at the bakery unannounced, stealing a kiss, sharing a laugh, sitting with her over coffee as though the world beyond the door did not exist. In these quiet moments, both of them felt completely content, their love grounded not in fantasy, but in reality. Arden's empire had not disappeared, nor had he abandoned it. Instead, he transformed it. Decisions once driven solely by power or survival were now balanced with vision and legacy. He invested in legitimate businesses, supporting ventures that employed people from the Ninth Ward, the same neighborhood that had shaped his youth. Programs for young men and women, educational initiatives, and community outreach became part of the empire he had built with his own hands. The violence that had defined him remained a shadow, but he no longer glorified it. He contained it, redirecting influence toward building something sustainable, a mark on the city that extended beyond fear. Their first anniversary arrived quietly. After closing the bakery, they sat among the empty tables, the fading sunlight streaming through the windows. They spoke about the year they had survived together, recalling moments of fear, laughter, and discovery. Arden admitted that before Bonnie, he had believed he could only ever be the man shaped by his survival instincts, the one feared and untouchable. "You made me believe I could be more," he said, his voice low but steady. Bonnie smiled, reaching for his hand. "You showed me what real love is. Not perfect love, not easy love, but love where two people choose each other, every day, despite everything against them." They talked openly about the challenges still ahead, the compromises that would always be necessary. Arden acknowledged that he could not abandon his world entirely, but Bonnie reminded him that the foundation of their love was not control, it was trust. "I don't need you to change who you are," she said. "I need you to let me be with you, fully aware of everything, and still want me there." Arden's lips curved into a faint smile, relief passing through him. "I can do that," he said. "I'll do that." As the night settled over the Marigny, they stepped outside, hand in hand, looking at the neighborhood that had witnessed both their struggles and triumphs. The bakery behind them was a symbol, yes, but so too was their love. They had learned that the greatest victories are not those measured by power, money, or fear, but by resilience, by courage to love, and by the willingness to remain open to vulnerability, even when it carried risk. Arden, a man who had conquered empires, had discovered that the most fragile and the most powerful thing he had ever held was Bonnie's trust and love. In the quiet hours before sleep, they often returned to the same thought. Arden would whisper about his gratitude, about how he could not imagine his life without her. Bonnie, her head resting against his chest, would remind him that love sometimes means accepting what cannot be changed, yet choosing to build a life anyway. Together, they were learning that power does not come from control, but from choosing to be present, to protect, to give, and to remain vulnerable. Their love had endured flames, fear, distance, and the weight of Arden's world. And through all of it, they built an empire not of violence or control, but of care, respect, and daily choice.
Arden's hands still bore traces of his past, calluses, faint scars, the occasional bruise, but they were hands capable of creation, of tenderness, and of holding Bonnie safely in the storm. Bonnie's eyes, once wary and uncertain, now shone with understanding and trust, reflecting a bond that had been tested and proven unbreakable. On a quiet morning, watching the sunrise over the Mississippi from their small kitchen window, they shared a look of unspoken understanding. Arden reached for Bonnie's hand, entwining their fingers, and said, "We have everything we need." Bonnie smiled, resting her head against him, feeling the warmth of home and heart.
"We have each other," she replied.
And in that moment, the lesson was clear. Arden had built his empire on blood, fear, and power, but it was love, fragile, demanding, and courageous, that had transformed him. True strength was not in domination, but in the willingness to trust, to be vulnerable, and to choose love every day. The bakery, the neighborhood, the city, they could all fade or change, but the empire of love they had created together would endure, a testament to the power of two hearts willing to face life fully, without illusions, side by side. To everyone listening, if you've been swept into a story of love, danger, and second chances, remember this: even the strongest, most untouchable people can learn to be vulnerable. And even in the hardest moments, love can transform what seems unchangeable. Thank you, truly, thank you for spending these moments with me. Every time you watch, every time you listen, every time you allow these characters to touch your heart, you give life to this channel.
Your support is the reason these stories continue to breathe.
We're on a journey together, one built on love, heartbreak, healing, and resilience. And now, we're reaching for a new milestone: 10,000 subscribers. It's a big dream, but it's a dream we can reach together. If you've been enjoying these stories, if you've ever felt seen, moved, comforted, or inspired by them, please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. Your subscription isn't just a number, it's a message that these stories matter, that this little storytelling family is growing, and that we're building something beautiful here.
Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying.
And thank you for being part of this journey. Let's reach 10,000, side by side.